of the Scientific and Specialty Council of the Sudanese Doctors in the Gulf. Today's webinar is one of the most enrichment webinars, and I would like to say will be the most important webinar during this quarter of 2021. I am Dr. Ibrahim Bani, an adjunct professor at the Global Health Department, Emory University, and I will be moderating today's discussions on COVID vaccination. So if we or any one of us says that we will definitely be vaccinated or plan to be vaccinated, actually getting vaccinated won't be or will not end the pandemic very soon. Because that many of the population in the world are unsure whether they are going to get the vaccine, and some of them, they say they will still never get the vaccine. Recent studies have shown that to stop COVID and its mutations, between 70 to 80% of the population must have some sort of immunity. So getting COVID will give you immunity and will give you antibodies. But there is a risk of burden on the healthcare system to the point where some chronic disease patients like cancer patients, diabetics, and cancer may not get the care they need to survive. This is with overstretched health system. And we will suffer major casualties. In Sudan, we lost many precious lives from COVID, but also from the broken health system due to COVID. The other path to drive up immunity, besides herd immunity, is to increase the numbers of people who are vaccinated so that to meet the pandemic in the middle and to stop the casualties. Today, we were going to talk about COVID vaccination, the immunological response, and the development of vaccine. Also, we'll talk about vaccine hesitancy and some myths about vaccination, talk about herd immunity. We'll talk about access and equity for vaccination and many more time-relevant updates on COVID vaccination. I would like to introduce my esteemed experts. Guests in this webinar include Professor Muiz Bakhit from Bahrain, Dr. Lee Abdul Fadil from Geneva, Switzerland, Dr. Nada Fadl from Nebraska, USA, Dr. Dalia Taib from Khartoum, Sudan, Professor Richard Garfield from Atlanta, Georgia, USA. First, after the presentations, we will have a Q&A sessions for our Zoom audience as well as our Facebook audience. And our first speaker will be Professor Muiz Bakhit. Professor Bakhit is the CEO, founder of the Princess Al Jawhara Center for Molecular Medicine and Genetics in Bahrain. Professor Muiz is also the chairperson of molecular medicine at the College of Medicine, Arabian Gulf, Bahrain. He's a graduate of Khartoum Medical College and awarded the PhD from Karolinska Institute, the home of Nobel Prize in Sweden. And he's also awarded the Swedish Board in Health and Neuroimmunology. Professor Muiz described the first protein that acts as a liaison between the nervous system and the immune system, and he discovered the gene for it. Professor Muiz published more than 120 papers in peer-reviewed journals, including Nature and Cell. He supervised more than 20 PhD students and more than 40 MPhil and master students, and he has been granted several international patents. Please go ahead, Professor Muiz.
Thank you, Professor Bani, for this nice introduction. I'm going to talk about the immune response and the vaccine development. This will be a simple scientific presentation, so I hope I will give an overview in 15 minutes. As you know, coronavirus is known as the royal viruses because of their crowns, these spikes. And they are envelope viruses with a positive single-stranded RNA genome of about 30 kb. Positive RNA means they have mRNA that can be directly translated by the ribosomes, while the negative RNA should be first converted by the RNA-dependent RNA polymerase to be positive. This is why they are copied quickly and they very quickly proliferate and develop and multiply. They are consisting of envelope, and the envelope has a lipid bilayer and a membrane protein known M protein and envelope glycoprotein known as E protein, and the spike, this is the structural proteins known as the S protein, which giving the shape of the crown, and they have like 74 spikes. So usually what happens when we are exposed to viral infection? For corona, the immune response partly similar to any viral challenge, but they are different slightly when they interact with our lung cells. So usually we have an innate immunity, the natural immunity that we were born with. This consists of the mucous membranes, the tears, the lysozymes, and also the fever, and this fever will interact with the metabolism of any infectious agent and will enhance the immune response and cough reflex. And then we have interferons like alpha, beta, gamma, and lambda. We have chemokines and activation of acute phase proteins, and then activation of cells of innate immunity like the macrophages, eosinophils, neutrophils, mast cells, basophils. Those all kind of non-specific immune defense that constitute the first defense line. So this will attack the invader and limit the infection. But the infection, if we have a high load of infectious agents or viruses, this may lead to a kind of cytokine storm and immunopathology, disseminated intravascular coagulation or autoimmunity later. But in most cases, the immune system will regulate itself, and this will lead to downregulation of these mediators, and then we get the specific response or the adaptive immunity. In some cases, the overactivation of the immune system may lead to immunosuppression. So the important thing is the specific immunity, which give us what we need for immunity, like humoral antibodies or cellular immunity, and this is related to the MHC restrictions, the major histocompatibility complex on the antigen presenting cells. So usually I will explain that. Then if the virus enter our cell, it will go directly to the ribosome, and in the ribosome, the protein will be formed the RNA of the virus will be copied, and these proteins formed will be digested in the proteasome and will be digested into peptides. These peptides will go into the endoplasmic reticulum, and then they will be associated with MHC class 1. This MHC class 1 will go inside the cell to what is known as the Golgi body, and then will be moved out and presented the MHC on the surface of the antigen presenting cells, our macrophages and other cells. So when it is presented, it will come the cytotoxic T cells. We call it the CD8. The CD8 will see the MHC class 1 because it has a beta-2 microglobulin in its structure. And this is the natural ligand of the CD8. The CD8 will become activated, and then it will secrete cytokine called perforin. It will make a hole on this cell containing the virus, and it will inject another cytokine called granzyme. This granzyme will activate the program cell death, will lead to DNA defragmentation, and this cell containing the virus should die. However, the viral proteins and the exogenous proteins will be internalized, and it will go to the early endosomes. They will be digested, and these peptides will go to something called loading compartment, and here it will be raised up on the surface of the cell with the MHC class 2, where the CD4, the T helper cell, will recognize it because this has alpha 1, alpha 2, beta 1, beta 2. This T helper cell will be activated. It can be T helper 1 producing a cytokine like interferon gamma. This interferon gamma will activate more MHC and antigen presentation, and also will activate more antigen presenting cells like macrophages. Or it can be T helper 2, and this T helper 2 will secrete cytokines, help the B cells to produce antibodies, the immunoglobulins that we need. So the antibodies and the cellular immunity are part of the T helper cells, while the CD8 will kill the infected cells. This involves a mechanism for T cell activation. I will not go through it, but I will tell you what happened in the COVID-19. If they pass this innate immunity I told you about, when they are enter or pass our epithelial cells and the nasal cavity, then they go into our alveolar cells, and then the transmembrane serine protease will cleave the S protein, and this will allow the viral RNA to enter the cell cytoplasm and start replication and transcription using the RNA-dependent RNA polymerase and transcriptase. So they will be copied there. During this copying, sometimes mutations may happen, and the RNA-dependent RNA polymerase start to correct the mutations. If the mutations are not corrected, like what happens, the mutation of N501Y, which is one of 6 key contact residues within the receptor binding protein, and that one was identified in United Kingdom as the new coronavirus strain. This will lead to increase of binding affinity to human, and also in murine angiotensin converting enzyme 2. Because the S protein usually to enter the cell, it has to, the coronavirus bind to, by its S protein to the ACE2 receptor to enter the cell by endocytosis. So when they enter the cell by endocytosis, our coronavirus, the replication here triggers something called pyroptosis. And pyroptosis is a highly inflammatory form of apoptosis of the programmed cell death. And the result will be release of DNA and ATP and interleukin-1 beta and other factors. So Then these released factors will be recognized by neighboring cells and resident alveolar macrophages, and they will promote secretion of pro-inflammatory cytokines like interleukin-6 and interleukin-8, which is a chemokine and tumor necrosis factor alpha, and other chemokines like MCP1 and RANTES. And most important thing, this will happen in alveolar cell type 2, which usually secrete the surfactant important for the expansion of the alveolar cells to help the exchange of oxygen between the oxygen we breathe in and the blood cells. So the factors which are released from the pyroptosis will attract more monocytes, dendritic cells, and this will amplify the system. Then more T cells, as I described in the adaptive immunity, will come, and then more release of cytokines will be happening, and this will be like a polyclonal activation of the immune system, leading to what is known as cytokine storm. One of the most cytokine leading to this storm is the interleukin-6. And the cytokine storm and interleukin-6 usually interfere with the coagulation pathway because of the release of the tissue factor, interfere with fibrinolysis, with activated protein C, and this will end in a lot of intravascular coagulation called disseminated intravascular coagulation, and it will lead to pulmonary embolism and further emboli to different organs, leading maybe to multi-organ failure. So people wanted to try different pathway to target for the management. As you remember, they started by chloroquine, and the chloroquine, because they found it inhibits the endocytosis after the binding between the S protein and the SE2 receptor, and also change the medium inside the cell to alkaline, and this will inhibit the RNA-dependent polymerase, and also increase more influx of zinc, and the zinc will increase the immunity. Also, they tried some antiviral like remdesivir, and remdesivir is like a nucleoside which will be inserted in the RNA-dependent RNA polymerase and should inhibit the copying of the virus. Also, they tried a drug called arbidol that will inhibit the membrane fusion during the virus assembly. And recently, they tried the monoclonal antibody directed against IL-6 to inhibit interleukin-6, that is tocilizumab, which also gave some good results. Some, of course, generalized immune inhibitors and immune suppression, like steroids, has been tried also in severe cases, etc. The other factor that has been noted and related to severe inflammation is bradykinin, which is a potent endothelium-dependent vasodilator and mild diuretics. I found bradykinin is highly produced, and it was related to the buildup of fluid in lungs. So some trials also with inhibitors to bradykinin was promising. But people were also looking for vaccine, and the strategy for vaccines, because of protection and because that the genetic drifting, although there are mutations in the RNA, but the proteins and genetic drifting has been extremely low. People were very enthusiastic to develop vaccines, and vaccines takes more than 15 years, but since this SARS-CoV-2 pandemic started, all scientists worldwide are combining efforts, sharing data, and establishing collaboration to speed the vaccine and development in few months. And of course, the governments and the foundations and the funds put to develop the vaccine accelerated this effort. Now we have more than 250 vaccines tested, and mostly are in preclinical or phase 1 and phase 2, but 10 entered phase 3, and they used several platforms like whole inactivated virus or live attenuated virus, protein subunit, and virus-like particles, or these new next generation platforms like a viral vector or antigen presenting cells or DNA and RNA viruses. So now we have 6 vaccines. 2 are mRNA from Moderna and Pfizer. These using the RNA instructs our cells to produce the SARS-CoV-2 spike proteins. And efficacy from Moderna is about 94.1, and from Pfizer about 95. The storage is different. In Pfizer is -70 degrees, and in Moderna is -20, and the doses are 2 doses. First start in Moderna and after 4 weeks, while in Pfizer after 3 weeks. Then we have another technology using the viral vector, where a harmless virus is engineered. That was an adenovirus contained, and then they inserted the gene for the SARS-CoV-2. This is like the one from Oxford, AstraZeneca, and from Johnson & Johnson, and Sputnik V, the Russian vaccine. And they have slightly differences in their dose and storage. For example, Oxford can be stored in 2 to 8, Johnson also, while the Russian one in -20, and they are all 2 shots, 3 to 4 weeks apart. The last one approved was the Sinopharm, that is the Chinese one. This is an inactivated virus, and then it was inactivated by a chemical process, and then is injected. I think they are a mixture of 3 viruses from Wuhan and Beijing and another city in China. There are also 2 doses, 3 weeks apart, and usually can be stored in 2 to 8 degrees. So just in conclusion, for therapy, several approaches have been tried, but so far no strategy yet been proven to be determinant for the treatment of the SARS-CoV-2. And the research undertaken worldwide and rapid transition from bench to clinic have really demonstrated a level of urgency and collaboration never witnessed before. Now we have 10 vaccines, 6 already been people are vaccinated with, started, and we hope this will help in ending the pandemic. But still several questions remain regarding the efficacy of these vaccines. First, to confirm mucosal immunity, because all these vaccines in phase 3 or all these are now given are intramuscularly. And furthermore, their effectiveness in older population with a weaker immune system should be also explored. The adverse effect in younger population with increased reactivity to vaccines also should be explored more. And finally, the scale of production and distribution to cover the worldwide demand also should be clear. And by that, I end my presentation. Thank you. I'm sorry to be a little bit late, 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Muiz, for your enlightenment on the vaccine development. And this will take us to another step further towards the access and equity and challenges, as well as the global initiative. With our next speaker is Dr. Lee Abdul Fadil. Dr. Lee is a public health physician, and he is a global health and HIV expert with many years of experience. And Dr. Lee provided technical leadership, strategic investment, and political advice across 80 countries with over $10 billion of grants in the Middle East, Africa, Europe, Latin America, and Southeast Asia. Dr. Lee has a strong experience in health diplomacy and cooperation at all levels. She worked with governments, bilateral and multilateral partners, as well as communities. Dr. Lee was awarded a public health prize at the medical school, and she was also awarded the British Kevin Scholarship. Dr. Lee.
Thank you very much, Professor Bani. And let me start by saying I'm privileged to be part of such an esteemed group of presenters and panelists for today. And I will pick up where Professor Muiz left. And I will also ask Dr. Muiz to give me over control so I can show a couple of slides that will be helpful, because I'll be talking about a lot of numbers. So I don't want you to get lost while I am speaking. I'll try and speak a lot in English and a little bit in Arabic, just a little bit, and I'll make sure that Professor Richard is 100% on board. Dr. Muiz. While Dr. Muiz gives me control so I can show my slides, or let me, okay, he gave me that. Oh.
Dr. Muiz.
Okay.
Yes, Dr. Ali, now you can share your slides, please.
Perfect. Let me try and share them. Just give me a second. Share screen. It's not working.
Host or a co-host.
Okay, perfect. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. So let me start by giving my warm condolences and prayers to all who we lost in this pandemic. All those who have loved ones who are sick at the moment, so wishes for speedy recovery. My mom and my grandmother, my sister and her family are all COVID patients at this particular moment, so this is very close to my heart. I will start by talking about, now that Professor Muiz have told us about the vaccines and what vaccines are available, I'll touch a little bit about access. And I'll talk to you first about the ACT Accelerator, which is the main global initiative. It's a unique global initiative that is led by WHO and partners. As you can see in the screen, the Global Fund is involved, UNITAID, FINE, Gavi, and others as well. So the ACT, it's a very unique partnership that started in April 2020 with a particular purpose to accelerate access to vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics. So all of the increase in the testing that we have seen has been partially because of Accelerator, or mainly in many of the countries, as well as access to PPEs and access to vaccines hopefully will pick up. The main goal when it comes to vaccines is to ensure that by the end of the year, by the end of 2020, 2 billion doses are available. And why 2 billion? 2 billion gives us around 20% of the global population. Those are the populations that are prioritized as Professor Mais and I will also touch on the prioritization, those who are most vulnerable and need the vaccine. However, there's a huge gap. There's a huge gap totally in the accelerator. In total, we need 31.3 billion, but there's also a huge gap in the vaccine initiative. So the vaccine arm, the one that you see led by Gavi and CEPI and WHO. The current need is $6 billion, and we've got around $6 billion, and the gap is 27. In the pipeline, we only have $4 billion. So we're left with 23 billion gap to ensure that we reach that globally we reach all our targets. On the side of the screen, you will see who is leading. So just for example, the Global Fund is leading and participating in the diagnostics, the health system connector, and the therapeutics. As part of the accelerator, we have the vaccine initiative. We have COVAX, and I'm sure Dr. Adali will be talking about COVAX a little bit, but just to give a global picture of what COVAX is. The purpose of COVAX is to ensure mainly three purposes, but there's others. The first is diverse portfolio management of the vaccine. So as Professor Murray said, there is 6 vaccines available. COVAX is trying to secure, incentivize, and invest in the development and the rapid deployment of 9 vaccine candidates. And there's another 9 in the pipeline. So all in all, 18. To ensure supply, to ensure that there is sufficient production. Usually the companies are very hesitant to produce large number of vaccines, but buying in bulk ensures that they are more comfortable in producing larger doses of the vaccine, which we need. So it surveys the market, it looks at what has clinical, epidemiological merit, invests, incentivizes, and then goes to securing the funding. I'm gonna leave securing the funding for a minute because I'll come back to it with the numbers. So securing the funding to ensure that countries, whether upper middle income country, high income countries, or low income countries like Sudan, have access to the vaccine. Whether they're self-funding, so they're paying for their own vaccines, or they're being funded by a third party. And finally, ensure equitable distribution. Because as you have seen, many epidemiologists, many clinicians, many journalists, many human rights activists have been calling for equitable distribution. It's a simple matter of those who have money might put in the requests first, buy bigger bulks, so production and supply will then dictate the demand, not the other way around. So one of the features of COVAX that it tries to regulate that and ensures equitable distribution among the self-financed and the funded countries. So far there is, it also acts as an insurance policy for those countries, the US, Canada, big countries, Britain, big countries who are self-funding. So there's 78 high-income economies that are participating in COVAX. There's a list online, you can look at it. But it acts as an insurance policy to ensure that production and supply matches demand. So you can think about it as an insurance and a buyer club all in one. Within COVAX facility, you can see in green, light green, there's something called Gavi COVAX AMC. AMC stands for Accelerated Market Commodities. So there is 92 low-income economies that Gavi is currently supporting through AMC to ensure that they have access. Sudan is one of them. I'm sure Dr. Adalia will talk about that, to ensure that regardless of their ability to pay, they will be receiving vaccines from either the 9 or the 9 that are in the pipeline. So some just numbers just to give you the scope and scale of what we're talking about. So almost 2.3 billion doses of COVID vaccines could be rolled out worldwide by the end of 2021. of these 1.8 are expected to be available to the 92 lower income countries that are part of AMC, COVAX AMC, led by Gavi. And at least 1.3 billion of those available will be available at no cost for the hosting governments. This will aim at even not only 20, which was the target, but 27% of coverage worldwide. Again, to give you scope and scale, 355 million of these vaccines will be available for Middle East and North Africa region. I will talk a little bit. So if I can summarize very quickly, COVAX facility ensures quick, fair, safe, and innovative access to vaccines in an equitable manner when they become available, as soon as they became available in the market. There are a few challenges that Professor Ramirez have touched upon, but also I'm sure that Professor Nada and Dr. Dalia will touch on. But I can sum them up globally and locally into 4 big buckets. There is some epidemiological imperatives and challenges we need to think about, some economic recovery imperatives, some programmatic challenges, and equity imperatives. So when we come to the epidemiological imperatives, and here this is very important, that we need to ensure that those who are most vulnerable receive the vaccine first. And for example, I'm just giving an example of prioritization. I'll talk about it more when I talk about programmatic challenges. For equitable distribution in COVAX, phase 1 will focus on healthcare workers, older patients, those above 65, 75, differs per country definition, those who have serious health conditions, also those who have serious health conditions differ per country. Now, phase 2, the pace will increase a little bit, where they're going to be prioritizing countries, not individuals. Those who have who are at risk, countries who are under a risk of high impact of COVID, countries with vulnerable health systems, and countries with large proportion of vulnerable population. Also, it's recommended from a public health approach that 5% of the entire pipeline should be taken into consideration when we think about humanitarian buffer, when we think about migrants, documented and undocumented, refugees, asylum seekers, and workers in health settings, so frontline workers. So we have to ensure the most vulnerable groups, individuals, and most vulnerable countries receive the vaccine first. For herd immunity, there's different numbers. There's no magic number, but it's between 50 to 80%. We're still new with COVID. For example, we know for flu, it's around 44%. The magic number is 44% to reach herd immunity. When it comes to COVID anywhere, scientists will say anywhere between 50 to 80%. Earlier, the ambitions of the accelerator based on the available funding and available supply and demand and all that is 20%. So there's still a huge gap. And I will urge us as individuals, as groups, as institutions to advocate for funding for ACT and for COVAX and COVAX AMC. So we have to keep in mind that not only 20%, but 50 to 80% of the population should be vaccinated to achieve herd immunity. We need to do that and too many other things, including therapeutics and diagnostics, to ensure that we end the acute phase of the epidemic. And finally, it's simple epidemiologically, and I'm sure the panelists will have a lot to say. But if we leave pockets, either individuals, groups, or countries, so if the whole world is vaccinated but 10 countries, or large group of individuals in a country are vaccinated but certain pockets, what's going to happen is that the COVID will mutate. This will make treatment more difficult, it will make the cases more resistant to treatment, but we will not be able to gauge the efficacy of the available vaccines. So we need to look at different options. It will cost more and it will need more time. So here where equity is important, everybody actually needs the COVID vaccine. Yes, there is a prioritization framework, but everybody needs it. And until we reach a threshold, we're not going to get over this phase. There's the economic imperative. There's a study the New York Times did. And today there is I'm just rounding up the numbers, but it costs us, the whole globe, around 400 billion a month. This shutdown, no traveling economy, we're losing 400 billion a year. If all developed countries, none of the developing countries receive vaccination to a threshold that is acceptable, these losses will continue. If 50% of developing country, which is an acceptable threshold, not the magic number of 70 or 80, but 50% only of developing countries, there will still be around 2 to 4 billion loss per year for the entire world, and it will be also heavily on in the developed countries, not the developing countries alone. Programmatically, we know the challenges. We know the challenges. I think any public health expert among this great esteemed audience, and I can see Professor Sheikh Badr have just raised his hand. Many of us know the programmatic challenges of scaling up any program, any public health program, but any vaccination program. But just to reflect on a few. COVID and the issues around COVID, not only responding to COVID, but adapting service delivery across NCDs and other infectious diseases have shown us that universal health coverage agenda is far from over, and that our health systems are weak across the world. The programmatic challenges include only a few regulatory approvals. There is a few countries now in the world that is not approving the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. We don't know why, but a few in the world have not approved that. So how quickly we can get over those hurdles, the prioritization framework, how rigorously we do that, planning and coordination at the country level and across with our neighbors and the border as well, cold chain and logistics, training of our staff, delivering the services, creating the space for delivery, and also ensuring the safety of the providers and recipients of the vaccine are very important challenges. And I would be remiss if I don't touch on issues around corruption, commercialization, and black markets. So we know that there is all these remain risks in developing countries, remain risks in Sudan. Unfortunately, we know now it costs 10 million to get a negative test in Sudan. You can buy it off the black market, and we all worry that these things will happen. So we kind of need to plan, identify those risks and plan for them. There is an equity imperative, and the equity imperative, as I mentioned, migrants, documented or undocumented. I know there is a huge audience from the Gulf. In the Gulf, or the Gulf Cooperation Council hosts around 10% of the global world migrants. So access of the vaccine to migrants, access to vaccine to internal displaced population, those in Darfur, those in the border with Eritrea and Ethiopia, undocumented and documented, refugees. Middle East and North Africa is the largest producer and host nations in general for IDPs and refugees. So we need to think about it from both directions. The marginalized communities, those who maybe are not educated, or live in overcrowding situations, stigma and discrimination. Nobody in Sudan will say, I am a high-risk group because I have HIV, please give me COVID. A few will, not everybody. So these are all considerations we need to think about. And finally, all issues with reaching remote areas in our countries across the world. I will leave you with one last message. No one is safe until everybody is safe. Thank you, and over.
Thank you, Dr. Lee, for your enlightenment on the access and the challenges we are facing. Our next speaker is Professor Nada Fadl. Is the Assistant Dean of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and she is a professor at the Department of Medicine, Division of Infectious Diseases, University of Nebraska Medical Center. Professor Nada is the director also of the UNMC Specialty Care Center. She is a graduate of Khartoum College of Medicine, and subsequently she was trained in the United States. Dr. Nada is an active humanitarian. She's an active in humanitarian issues, especially facing Sudan, and she volunteered at several local and national community organizations in Sudan. Professor Nada has published in peer-reviewed journals several articles, abstracts, and chapters in books. She presented her research at national and international meetings, and she mentored several students and trainees. Dr. Nada will talk about facts about vaccines, COVID vaccine, as well as the myths about the vaccination.
All right, thank you, Bro Bani, for the kind introduction. Do you guys see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what is actually out there about COVID vaccines, and we'll address it from a place of a positive note. So instead of talking about vaccine hesitancy and vaccine reluctance, we're going to talk about how we can build vaccine confidence in our healthcare providers, so that way we can increase the vaccine uptake in the community. I don't have any conflict of interest except for the fact that I got vaccinated and I'm still doing fine. This is the objectives of my talk. So we'll talk about how to build vaccine confidence. We'll review a little bit of some of the issues out there, concerns about mRNA technology, the nanotechnology, and vaccine development, and how it's done in such an accelerated fashion. So I'm borrowing a lot of these slides from the CDC. I advise everyone to visit the Vaccinate with Confidence resource. It has amazing resources, especially for the healthcare team. And since most of our audience are from the healthcare background, I felt like this would be an appropriate talk for them. So just to kind of rehearse, when we talk about vaccine reluctance or vaccine confidence, we usually talk about a spectrum that goes all the way from refusal all the way to demanding the vaccine. And the way to increase that, confidence basically depends on three things: the vaccine itself, the vaccinator, and the healthcare system. So patients who are refusing vaccine, they usually have very low confidence in vaccine development, in the vaccinator, and in the healthcare system. And patients who demand the vaccine, on the other hand, have a lot of confidence in all of these three elements. There are patients who fall in the middle, and that's what we call passive acceptance. And these are the ones who are just kind of waiting to see how this is all going to go before, they want others to get vaccinated first. And, if you look at this from like an implementation science perspective, so we, usually say these are the laggards and these are the innovators or the early adopters who jump on and take, the risk of, so to speak, of getting vaccinated early. So the three elements we talked about is that in order to build that confidence in your patients and those around you in the community, you really need to establish that trust in these three elements. And that trust comes by you as a provider recommending to your patients, your parents, your colleagues, your family members, your community network, strongly recommending the vaccines to them. And you as a provider having, that trust from the community in you, that will definitely help the uptake of the vaccine. And also explaining the processes and the policies and how this vaccine was developed, how it was licensed, how it was manufactured, and how it was finally got to the consumer, and explaining that that actually was done in a systematic fashion and in a trusted fashion. All of these elements do define how vaccine confidence work and how to build that vaccine confidence. The challenge that we're facing, at least now in the US, I don't have the global data on this, but in the US, several surveys were made asking general public as well as healthcare providers about their willingness to get vaccinated. And only 58% of the general public actually said they would get vaccinated. Granted, this is all data. Things might have changed since then, but we're still seeing a lot of vaccine hesitancy or lack of confidence out there in the community. When you talk about healthcare providers, it's even more concerning because as of October of this year, or last year, only 63% said they would get the COVID vaccine. We're seeing a lot of variability in demographics and in regional uptake of COVID vaccine, and that has to do a lot with those three elements of vaccine confidence that we spoke about. So in order for you to help build that confidence in your patients, the most important thing is that for you as a healthcare provider to choose to get vaccinated, and for you to start those conversations early with your patients. Don't wait till the vaccine is out. Start them very early so you can have an opportunity to address any concerns or any myth. And whether you can do that directly with your own patients or whether you do it in forums like these, you know, Facebook Lives, in short videos, short messages, pictures, WhatsApp messages, whatever way you can actually get that message out there to establish that confidence early. And it's important to engage in effective conversations, not controversial conversations, not confrontational type of conversation, but effective conversations to give the knowledge to people so they can make an informed decision. And be prepared for questions. Some of these questions are going to be very challenging. Some of them are going to be very difficult. So you have to be prepared to address them. And you have to also be prepared to say, I don't know. We don't know yet. We don't have that data, which sometimes can be frustrating to the audience. My daughter one time told me, like, what are you good for? You guys, physicians always say, we just don't know. We don't have the data. That's your common answer for everything. So what do you guys really know? And, you know, human bodies are just too complicated to just put them in a spectrum. Sometimes you just say, I don't know. And that's an honest and transparent answer. Some methods that really work, especially in your local network, in your clinic, in your facility, is to identify vaccine champions, especially those who actually had issues with getting the vaccine before, who were hesitant and had concerns, and then got vaccinated. Those could be your best champions to advocate for others to get the vaccine, because they can come from a place where they understand why people are hesitant to get the vaccine. This is a picture of me getting vaccinated. I posted it on social media. I shared it with my family and friends to let them know that I did get the vaccine, and I got some side effects, but they were tolerable and they're definitely better than getting COVID. Now, when we talk about effective vaccine conversations, what do we mean by that? We mean that you have to come from a place of empathy and understanding. Don't underestimate the person on the other side. Don't joke about what they say. You know, just try to understand where they're coming from. Usually it's a place of, you know, good intent and really concerned about what this could be all about. And it's very important that you have to assume that the patient is prepared to get vaccinated and try to address them from that perspective. You know, address them from a positive perspective. Don't assume that they're not going to get vaccinated and just kind of give up on them. Try to see where the hesitancy is coming from. And it's very important to give strong recommendations. You know, use words that emphasize that you're very confident in the vaccine, and you say, strongly recommend that you get the vaccine. This is very important for you because you have high risk condition. I do that with my parents. I'm like, لازم انتوا بالتحديد يعني بيقول لي طبعا عندي سكر يعني عندي كده هل انا اخذ الفاكسين؟ No, you especially because of these comorbid conditions, you're the one who should get vaccinated first because you're at the highest risk of getting complications from COVID if you do end up getting COVID. Listen, that's very important to actively listen to their concerns and respond to those questions. And it's very important to actually proactively explain side effects. Don't wait till the questions come. Be transparent, be very proactive about explaining side effects and not wait for them to get those side effects. Some of the common questions that might come up and you might want to address them proactively are things like the COVID vaccine will not give you COVID, that you will get side effects and those usually indicate a good immune response, and that people who got COVID already still should get the vaccine because we don't know about the immunity from COVID and how long it's going to last. And that getting vaccinated from with COVID vaccine will prevent you from getting way too sick and will prevent you from dying from COVID. And that's really the most important message that we want to send out there. And that COVID vaccine will not cause you to get COVID, and it will not cause you to test positive for COVID. A few myths out there about messenger RNA technology and how to debunk those myths. We all know from biology, I'm hoping that everyone out there just kind of knows that we all have DNA in our nucleus. And DNA is basically what stores our genetic material, the instructions that the body needs for it to function. And the ultimate purpose of DNA is to produce proteins, but that happens in a process by producing messenger RNA. And think of messenger RNA as a software, and think of proteins as the applications, just like the apps on your cell phone. Messenger RNA is the software to produce those apps. I talk to people and say, this is a recipe. It's like you're giving your cell a recipe on how to make this protein. And that the fact that proteins is really what we need for our body to function, that's also very important for people to understand. use those simple words like messenger RNA teaches your cell how to make a harmless protein. It gets destroyed immediately after the cell is done with that function. They do not affect your DNA. Messenger RNA cannot enter the nucleus. It's a one-directional street. It goes from DNA to messenger RNA to protein. You cannot go backwards. And that's a very important thing for people to understand. They cannot give somebody COVID. And the fact that while COVID vaccines, the messenger RNA vaccines are new, the technology is not new. It has been used before. We actually studied it before, even for vaccines. We studied it in Zika, in CMV vaccine, in influenza vaccine. So we actually knew about this technology way before we now used it for COVID vaccination. A lot of questions come about vaccine ingredients, and I love this picture from MIT Technology Review. They do go into details about explaining vaccine ingredients and that these are basically harmless substrates. It's nothing more than substrates that sometimes actually circulate in your own body. So basically nanoparticles, what's the purpose of nanoparticles is to protect that messenger RNA so it gets to its target without the body degrading it and without the body breaking it down. They have been used before many times. They've been used for the chemotherapy drug Doxil. They've been using for cholesterol lowering agents, some of the new agents out there. They've been used actually before for siRNA delivery in some other medications. So this is not new. One conspiracy theory that's circulating now in the Muslim world is that these nanoparticles contain pork products, and they do not. They're simple lipids, they're structural lipids, cholesterol, and inside them is the nucleic acid, which is the messenger RNA in this case. A lot of questions also arise about vaccine development process, and it's very important to assure your patients that the development process went through the regular regulatory process, regular development process. There were no shortcuts in that process. The only difference is that there was a lot of funding and political will to accelerate vaccine development, just like what Dr. Lee explained about the global effort to accelerate vaccine development and distribution. That also happened here in the US. And the goal of this Operation Warp Speed, which got us to this point where we were able to have a vaccine in only 10 months, is that they did this way ahead of time, planned all this together, put it together. There was a lot of investment, a lot of coordination between different agencies, and a lot of funding devoted to this. It was like $10 billion. Anthony Fauci described this as a talent show because there were so many agencies that came together. I'm not going to go into all of them in details, but they came together and put each agency's skills and talents into this operation on how to make this move a lot faster. They focused on development, manufacturing, as well as distribution, and they selected 6 vaccines to invest in. So this is a typical vaccine process that goes all the way from the identifying the target that you're going to do the vaccine for, doing animal studies, phase 1 studies, phase 2, 3 studies, then manufacturing, then distribution. And this is usually the sequence that takes on average 73 months. But in the COVID vaccine case, it took 14 months to completion because there was a lot of overlap, as you could see in these phases. And most importantly, manufacturing started way early. They didn't wait to complete all the trials to start manufacturing, but that process, at least, of how we're going to manufacture this, it started very early. There were a lot of partnerships that worked all the way from authorization to allocation to prioritization. Like Dr. Lee said, identifying those target population based on data. This involved the National Academy of Science, the CDC, all the way to where we're going to distribute this and how we're going to deliver it. And they used a lot of resources that were already existing. You know, there were several resources within the system, whether they were public partners or private partners, and brought all of these partners together to eventually deliver the 2 approved vaccine, the Moderna vaccine and the Pfizer vaccine, to the target regions and target populations. Now, till we get to that point, Dr. Richard is going to talk to us, or Prof. Richard is going to talk to us about getting to herd immunity. But remember, this is going to take a long time. We need to practice those 3 W's, and we need to avoid those 3 C's in order for this to work eventually, and the virus shouldn't mutate rapidly to the point that the vaccine doesn't work. So please remember to do that until we get to the point where everyone is vaccinated. And I'll stop here and thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Nada, for your enlightenment on the vaccine facts, and also answering some doubtful and hesitant issues in COVID vaccination. Our next speaker is Dr. Dalia Taib, who will cover about vaccination access and plan in Sudan. Dr. Dalia. Dr. Dalia is the MCH Maternal and Child Health Director at the Federal Minister of Health, Sudan. And Dr. Dalia is currently the head of COVID National Technical Committee. Dr. Dalia is a public health physician with awarded MPH from South Africa, Cape Town University. She was a fellow of reproductive, sexual and reproductive health fellow at the University of Lund, Sweden. And she is an expert in health policy analysis, qualitative research, implementation, research related to FGM, and respected mother care and surveillance at the Ministry of Health and at international NGOs. Dr. Dalia.
شكرا يا بروف.
تفضلي.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, colleagues at the specialized councils of Sudanese sector in the Gulf for this opportunity, and I'm honored to be part of this webinar, joining such experts. I'm going to provide an overview on the country's preparedness to COVID-19 vaccine introduction, and I will focus on the three main areas. I will focus on COVID-19 vaccination program in the country, the aim of the program, the related structure, governance, and decision-making. The second thing is I will give a very introduction to the national deployment and vaccination plan, and I will end with the main challenges that could struggle us in Sudan to vaccinate, to provide access to vaccination. The COVID-19 vaccination program in Sudan is designed to ensure the safe, effective, and efficient administration of COVID-19 vaccine to all in the country, including the refugees, of course. And the vaccination will be free of charge at the point of delivery. The main objective is to reduce the morbidity and mortality and maintain the most critical essential services also, and then expand to reduce transmission and disruption of social and economic function. This will be achieved through vaccination of 3% of the population to cover frontline healthcare workers in direct patient contact or who at risk of exposure to bodily fluids or aerosol. Hence, will be followed by 17% of population based on the prioritization sequence to maximize the benefit from the 20% from the COVAX facility, and then to expand to cover additional 60% using the window with cost sharing, aiming to reach the herd immunity. Regarding the COVAX facility, thank you, Dr. Lee. You made my life easy now. You provided most of the issue that I would like to note. As Dr. Lee said, COVAX facility is a platform responsible of vaccine availability all over the world. The main actors within this facility are Gavi, the Global Alliance of Vaccines, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness and Innovations, and WHO, together with multinational and developing country vaccine manufacturer also, working on the COVAX vaccine pillar to develop the COVAX facility. The main conception of the COVAX facility is the overall conception lies on the notion that with a fast-moving pandemic, no one is safe unless everyone is safe. Hence, effective vaccines against COVID-19 are urgently needed to protect population and restart economies. Where they can, governments are funding the development of candidate vaccines and making agreement with vaccine manufacturer. The facility provides all governments, regardless of whether they are self-financing or will receive procurement supply, with the opportunity to benefit from the large portfolio of the COVID-19 candidate vaccines using a range of technology platforms produced by more manufacturers across the world. With a bigger market to provide security of demand, often with greater scope than government or regional groups can support on their own. The facility is reinforced, as Lee said, by the Gavi COVAX Advanced Market Commitment, which provide funding for vaccine for developing countries to avoid financing being a barrier to access, creating a scale, and therefore making the facility more attractive for manufacturers, as well as creating opportunity to tackle the pandemic around the world. The offer that provided to us in Sudan is vaccine vials covering 20% of the population, but it comes in small tranches. The 20% will not come at once, but it will come in small tranches starting from first week of March until end of August. On July 2020, Sudan received an invitation from Gavi to participate on the group consultation, the AMC consultation. The main objective was to clarify the COVAX offer and how the facility it works, to provide information on the AMC and the most important thing, it was opportunity to discuss, clarify, and come to common understanding on key issues related to participation, governance, designing of the COVAX. I will come back to the vaccination program. Sudan, I just want to highlight the issues that Sudan has a very strong set of institutional arrangement to support good governance, in particular to safety of any vaccine. It has a well-established and fully functional national immunization technical advisory group in place, and specifically for COVID-19 vaccine, decrees from the Minister of Health to formulate 2 national committees was issued. The National High-Level Steering Committee that composed of most of the general directorates and decision maker from other sectors, and also this high steering committee is upgraded and sponsored now by the Prime Minister. And the other committee is a technical committee, National COVID-19 Introduction Technical Committee. However, both of them, of these committee, the aim of them, it's not to replace or displace the existing roles and responsibility, but will have an oversight role and avail program management support to the existing structure. The process of decision making, or that the decision taking, was gone through all official and technical consultation. The higher government official participated on all consultation with Gavi and at the COVAX AMC platform. The head of NITAG, Professor Karar, was included in all the orientation sessions with either the regional committees or the WHO headquarter level. The NITAG held more than 5 meetings now to review all the available data, to provide recommendation to the Minister of Health on joining the COVAX or introduce of COVID-19 vaccine to the country. And even the NITAG, because the NITAG was mainly for the last year that focused on under 5 years of age. However, the NITAG now is expanded to have more experts related to COVID-19, people from the Institute of Endemic Diseases, University of Khartoum, immunologists, physicians, are now joining the NITAG to support the decision-making or the recommendation for COVID-19 introduction. And also related to the National Technical Committee, the National Technical Committee split it to the 9 subcommittees covering the main pillars of the national vaccine deployment and vaccination plan. The National Deployment and Vaccination Plan, it's emerged from the 9 pillars, serving 20% at current of the population. However, over the time will be updated in order to cover the open access if we reach the open access vaccination in future. But currently, our National Deployment and Vaccination Plan was intended to put the actions in place for 3% of population, prioritized according to the prioritization sequence, starting from the healthcare worker at front lines and elderly and people with comorbidity and so on. The 9 work stream, as I have said, it's include the regulatory preparedness, because for us in Sudan, it is the first time for National Medical Poison Medicines and Poison Board to face such an emergency case that need introduction of vaccine, which may not be a WHO pre-qualified. النوشن عادة ما بنستقبل أصلا في السودان any vaccine ما ماخذ WHO pre-qualification. However, in this case, the National Medicines Poisons Board may rely on vaccines approved by stringent regulatory authority or WHO emergency use licensing, which is procedure done by WHO. The EOL is the procedure done by WHO and depend on risk assessment approach regarding quality, safety, and efficacy of vaccine. However, this is not highly recommended by National Medical Poison Board, but it will, within the plan, they already provide, they will apply the fast track pathway for the vaccine approval and will implement the compliance to ensure the compliance of warehouses with good storage practices, and also will work to monitor safety, efficacy, quality of vaccine, post-immunization surveillance or post-marketing surveillance. Within the work stream, the second work stream is focus on the planning and coordination to have the political commitment, and also focus on the country ownership and policy issues. This work stream and the subcommittee designed for that, for this work stream, work on many models, especially the public-private engagement model and the coordination with different sectors, and also they are working to develop even the micro plans and the subnational coordination, of course. There is also very important subcommittee, the subcommittee related to the service delivery and identification of target populations. This subcommittee composed mainly of people from Federal Ministry of Health with the Civil Registry and Central Bureau of Statistics, and many people that have data regard the identification of the target population. The National Health Insurance also included. The main role of this subcommittee is to provide the technical committee with the service delivery strategy for vaccination, and also the identification or the prioritization sequence. They have a scoring system for the target population. Basically, the sequence is started from the frontline healthcare workers all over Sudan, because Gavi already committed to provide Sudan on 31st of January. They sent a letter to the Minister of Health regarding indicative distribution of the AstraZeneca. They will provide 3,369,000 doses to Sudan by late February, early March. It depends, subjected to WHO emergency use licensing and completion of the very important points that the country should submit the indemnification form, and also the liability to the manufacturer of the AstraZeneca. and also the ensuring all the preparatory measures that are in place for successful rollout. So basically, by first week of March, we are expecting 3,369,000 doses of AstraZeneca that to be arrived to Sudan. Hence, this subcommittee involved in the service delivery identification of target population are work to prepare even the vaccination post and the identifying the best vaccination service delivery strategy, and we call it this is initial rollout. I think the 3%, vaccinating 3% will give us the chance to review the preparedness plan, and also the learning from this 3% will have strengthen our plan for the 17% and the open access or then 45 to 60%. Also, there is a subcommittee specifically for the cold chain and logistics. Mainly, Sudan has an immunization supply chain that consists of the national store, very big central cold chain store in Khartoum state, and then there is 18 cold chain in the other 18 states, and at the state level also we have more than 2,421 service at the service delivery points. Small cold chain. The cold chain capacity at the national and state level are adequate for regular vaccine, including campaigns with free space available in posts +2 to +8, and also -20 at national and subnational level. So ultra cold chain are not in Sudan. So readiness for Pfizer يعني not exist. عندنا only readiness في الcold chain لل +2 to 8 and -20. يعني ممكن نكون ready for Moderna, but for Pfizer because the -70 at EPI cold chain not exist. However, because at 6th of January, the Gavi contacted us to submit a proposal for first wave rollout using Pfizer for vaccinating only 50,000 centralized healthcare worker. We identified our plan. We have like ultra cold chain at the Central Blood Bank and the National Public Health Laboratory and University of Khartoum. يعني ممكن نكون جاهزين للالترا كول chain, but it needs يعني نرتب روحنا أكتر يعني. The cold chain capacity at national level is more than 300 liters, and ودي ممكن تكون very enough إن إذا عايزين ندي الفاكسين ل 20% of the population يعني. Another subcommittee, it's related to vaccine safety and adverse event following immunization. وعندنا في السودان very well established surveillance system للadverse event following immunization من 2005, وحتى backed up by causality assessment committee. They meet regularly وبيعملوا classification regularly. The planning in place for effective pharmacovigilance preparedness. The vaccine acceptance and uptake. Thank you, Neda, Dr. Neda, for your presentation. It's برضو Neda here supporting the group inside the country, the vaccine acceptance and uptake group. They have a plan to to generate the demand, and they aim to ensure high level of vaccine acceptability and uptake among frontline healthcare workers. And also the main activity include generation of behavior and social data on vaccine demand and uptake, securing high level political and trusted influencers and capacity building at national and subnational level. Also monitoring the rumors and misinformation and treat those rumors. The other subcommittee, there is a subcommittee mainly to this COVID-19 surveillance, and their plan is to establish a system link the vaccine effectiveness and impact of vaccination to the COVID-19 surveillance, and also to understand long-term immunity, duration of immunity, and need for booster doses due to waning immunity. The last subcommittee is a costing and budgeting committee. برضو أنا هنا I would like to draw the attention that COVAX facility will provide only doses, the vaccine doses, without any consumable operation cost and so on. Fortunately, the World Bank already showed the interest to cover the 3% deployment plan, the operation cost, and the consumable for it. However, still there is a budget gap related to the costing the vaccination program. The main challenge is that I've sought with the identification and registration of the beneficiaries, especially those the elderly with a comorbidity, because still they don't have a clear strategy to have those population. However, the 20% of our population, the 8.6 million, includes most of the include the 6 million of them is 45 years of age and above. Then the other challenges is also the governance that the well-established strong API program is specifically related to the black market and those issues. And also the moral failure related, especially those days, many private sector companies that would like to vaccinate their staff. We don't have a problem actually on that, but at least to follow the prioritization sequence, because we don't want to end up with people who are in 20s and 30s vaccinated, and the most people at risk, the healthcare workers and elderly not being vaccinated just because their access is limited, and the private sector there have the access. That's why we are thinking on the public-private engagement model related to this challenge. The vaccine, the financial gap, it's challenges, especially in the current economic situation. I don't expect too much money from the Ministry of Finance now, and also the other the preparedness for types of COVID-19 vaccines such as Pfizer will be a challenge for Sudan to have vaccine diversification. If we would rely on the cold chain available in the country, will be limited with kind of vaccines, not all the vaccines, and also the vaccine arrival in tranches and the priority setting and its impact, especially on the community expectation related to the vaccine arrival. We have a problem related to time factor. Most of those, especially the private sector, want the vaccine now, but actually the 3% will be prioritized only for the healthcare workers and elderly. I think I'm not sure, but I think more than 65% with comorbidity. Thank you. I think I will stop here and I will follow the Q&A questions. Thank you, Prof. I'm so sorry I couldn't. I thought my video is open. I'm so sorry.
Thank you. Our last speaker is Professor Richard Garfield. who will wrap up and talk about herd immunity. Professor Richard is the Professor Emeritus of Clinical International Nursing, Clinical Population and Family Health at the Columbia University, United States of America. Since 2013, Professor Richard has been the team lead in emergency and response recovery at the Center for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta, Georgia, United States. Professor Richard worked with health authorities in Central America in malaria control. Moreover, Professor Richard has helped to reorganize health services to protect civilians from impact of conflicts. And he has studied the effects of economic sanctions in many countries, including Iraq, Cuba, Nicaragua, Liberia, Haiti, former Yugoslavia, and he also took part in need assessment in Myanmar, Pakistan, and South Sudan. Professor Garfield is the founding director of Health and Nutrition Tracking Service at the World Health Organization, and he continued to collaborate with the WHO on global health security. Professor Richard?
And perhaps more important, I was able to take part in the Joint External Evaluation for Global Health Security in Khartoum.
Oh, very interesting. Okay, good.
I have a couple comments to sort of wrap up what other presenters have done so well. One of the questions that has been raised several times by presenters and in the question and answers has to do with the relative effectiveness of various vaccines that are already approved or in the process of reaching to stage 3 trials. Until now, it appears that the most effective vaccines are the messenger RNA vaccines. But the adenovirus vaccines, a more traditional approach for developing vaccines, which is the method being used by AstraZeneca, the vaccine which is soon to be imported to Sudan, while a somewhat lower effectiveness is still highly effective. And perhaps over time will have even greater advantages because the high effectiveness of the messenger RNA vaccines has to do with their very high specificity to the current condition of the virus. But as we are every day more aware, the virus is mutating and developing in various ways. Both types are effective against the newer mutants that are predominant in the UK. But it is not as clear yet if the messenger RNA viruses are as effective against the worrisome strains that are occurring in South Africa and Brazil and are currently moving around the world. The adenovirus vaccine-based one, because it's based on 2 strands of DNA instead of 1 single strand of RNA, actually has a wider coverage and may over time prove to be more useful. The messenger RNA vaccines are being revised to adapt to the mutations, but coronavirus is proving to be a very highly mutating virus. And so we will be playing catch up, I think. So the message overall with this is that all of the vaccines that have been approved are highly effective, and any of them can be used with a high level of confidence that the side effects are few and the protective effects are great. We don't know as much about the vaccines that have been developed in Russia and China, and these will probably become much more important for some of the low resource countries because their cost, at least during 2021, is likely to be lower than some of the other vaccines. They have not engaged in stage 3 trials and transparent presentation of those results as some of the other vaccines, meaning that the approval process through the World Health Organization is going to take longer. But we do have the impression that they are also highly effective. We have these impressions from a clinical point of view, in that we are seeing low to no cases among anyone who has received any of these vaccines. I said that wrong. Not that there is no infection, but there is no hospitalization or deaths among anybody who has received any of these vaccines. So, of course, we want to see a full examination and preparation for safety purposes, but in health diplomacy and in political diplomacy and in clinical promotion, many countries are getting access either to Chinese or to Russian vaccines. And while I cannot vouch for them personally, I would take it. I would consider it a low risk activity with a high degree of protection, whereas the lack of vaccine is a high risk activity. And we do have a paper in the Lancet this week on the Russian adenovirus vaccine, which gives us confidence. And we will be learning more about all of these as we go. So the real question is not which vaccine, and I mention this because as low-income countries start to get vaccines, you're likely to get some of one and some of another, and people will be confused and everybody will be asking which is the good one. The answer until now is apparently they're all good ones. And the real question is not which one to take, but how long it provides protection. That's what we will not know until we have more time to see follow-up. And one of the questions in the question and answer is, if you have been infected, should you take a vaccine? The answer is clearly yes. Both because we don't know how long natural infection provides protection, and it's likely to be quite variable. So some people may be immune and others may not, who have been infected and are now post-infective. We can gather information quickly about antibody levels, but that doesn't tell us whether the person can or cannot be infected. Only through population-based assessment over time with epidemiologic data will we know that in time. What we know right now is that several countries have provided high levels of vaccination already. Things are moving very rapidly. Israel is the country with the highest level of immunization for COVID vaccine in the world, at 63% of the whole population, quite remarkable. And the United Arab Emirates is the second most common at 39%. These countries have been very high in focusing on their priority, and they are small countries with highly organized health systems which could distribute vaccine quickly. And in both of those countries, we've seen a very rapid drop in the number of new cases. So we are seeing great success, not just in the scientific development, but in populations where vaccine gets used widely. And I think we will continue to see, as we have seen in the United States, that vaccine hesitancy is dropping as more people know people who have had the vaccine. It is very worrisome to us that while physicians have a very high level of utilization of vaccine where they have access to it, other health workers have less acceptance. So physicians, it's more than 90% that want the vaccine. Nurses and other support staff are more subject to lack of trust or lack of scientific confidence. And in the United States, maybe at 60 or 70%. But to me, that's a very good process, because if physicians take it, if physicians do well, if physicians do not get infected, others are following and seeing their model. This is the effect of trusted individuals, where one doesn't have a universal trust for information from a central level of science or government. And over time, we are seeing vaccine hesitance to drop. But we are likely to have, even in countries where there is a high level of vaccine available, a population of 10 to 20, maybe even 30% of people who are slow, very slow to do uptake. And we are facing continued transmission over time. We will all see coronavirus continuing, hopefully at very low levels by the end of this year in the countries that were able to vaccinate more than half of their population, and into next year as well with the rest of the world, and then also thus in countries even that vaccinated at fairly high levels. We will be co-living with coronavirus for an extended period of time. And if we are lucky over the time, it will become something like the flu, in that it is adjusting and being reinfected at relatively lower levels than it is to the virgin population of the world as it has been over the last year, and will cause less severe infection because of some kinds of innate immunity or boosted immunity through something like an annual vaccination. I want to show you one video of 30 seconds. What I'm not sure is whether you will hear the sound, but I'm going to show it to you. And then if you didn't hear the sound, I will try to make the sound for you, because it is, for me, the very best example of communication of vaccine promotion for COVID. I think you are seeing my screen now. This is a video that's being used in New Orleans in the United States, using local culture and color and having people of various communities of New Orleans describe their view on this point. So it's 30 seconds, I'm playing it now.
It's my shot. I'm getting the vaccine so we can have Mardi Gras, y'all. It's my shot. I'm getting.
Let me interrupt. Could you hear the video?
Yes.
Oh, very good. The first one said, I'm having the vaccine so we can have Mardi Gras, which is the annual festival of New Orleans.
A vaccine to protect my family.
Second woman said, I'm getting the vaccine so I can protect my family.
I'm going to get my shot so I can visit my 92-year-old mom and we can eat in our favorite restaurants.
The third one says, I'm getting the shot so I can visit my 92-year-old mom and we can eat in our favorite restaurant. These are very New Orleans things.
Getting the vaccine to continue my culture.
I'm getting the vaccine so I can continue my culture.
I can dance another day.
So I can dance another day.
I don't have to lose another brother.
So I don't have to lose another brother.
Sleeves up, Nola. 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 Sleeves up, Nola.
So everybody ends up by saying the slogan, sleeves up, New Orleans. A lot of positive messages, a lot of motivation. It's just amazing. They're not spending their time saying, no, 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 there's no pork product. Oh, don't worry about this or that. Or they're not trying to debate people. They're saying why they should do it, why they want to do it. And then they have a unified message about what to do, which is sleeves up to get the vaccine. I'm having trouble seeing where to, oh, okay, stop sharing. Back to me. I think those were the main points that I wanted to give. We're seeing a remarkable success so far. Of course, we are dealing with early adopters around the world and the hunger for vaccine. Later, we're going to have to use the experience with early adopters and local leaders and remarkably improve the quality of our communication to people, like this video that I showed you. Sleeves up, New Orleans. Very simple, exactly to the point. That's it for me.
Thank you. Thank you, Prof. Richard. I think we will go now to the second part of the webinar about the Q&A. questions. I will take some of the questions and you answered, I think, some of them. One question is about what are the exclusion criteria for COVID vaccination, COVID-19 vaccination?
Anyone can answer, or
anyone can answer?
Go ahead and start, and I'll follow.
Yes.
Okay, from the trials, those who were not included in the trials, of course, the pregnant women and children, those were not included in the trials. But for me, for example, as a neurologist, I get this question from my MS patients, my multiple sclerosis patients, because they are on disease-modifying drugs that they get immunosuppression. And so in those cases, I take it individually. First, I see what type of medications they are using and how is their immune situation. For example, their white blood cell count, if it is above 2,000, and if they don't have other kind of problems, then so it's more individualized. Those who are under immunosuppressive treatment or during transplantation or other patients. But in the trial, mainly the children and the pregnant women. And I'm not sure about breastfeeding. So Dr. Nada can follow.
Yeah, and I would like to add to that is that it depends on the type of the vaccine. So if you're talking about the messenger RNA vaccine, the absolute contraindications is that if somebody has severe anaphylaxis to the vaccine components or had the first dose and then had immediate anaphylaxis or reaction to the vaccine. But there's a lot of like issues in the middle. So like the gray zones, some of them Dr. Moise mentioned already. They're not considered absolute contraindications, but they're just not enough information or some precautions that have to be taken into consideration. For example, somebody who had the monoclonal antibody therapy, what we call MABs, those people, or if they had convalescent plasma, then in that case, you might want to wait 90 days before you give them the vaccine. People who had other vaccinations, you want to wait 2 weeks before you give them the COVID vaccine. There's some, gray zones that are unknowns, like, he mentioned pregnant women. The American College of Obstetric and Gynecology, at least for us here, for our guidelines, say that pregnant women should not be withheld from getting the vaccine. It should be offered to them because the risk of getting sick and dying from COVID is much higher in pregnant women, especially those with comorbid conditions. As Dr. Moise mentioned, we don't have enough data in children. The Pfizer vaccine was studied down to age 16, and there are now ongoing clinical trials looking at younger ages, but we just don't have information whether it's safe, effective, etc. In those age groups. But in terms of absolute contraindications, there are very few of who you cannot absolutely vaccinate. Obviously, when we get live vaccines, this will differ, but right now we don't have any of those. So that's a conversation for the future. But as of now, especially for messenger RNA vaccines, there are very few. And for protein-based vaccines and adjuvant vaccines, there's even fewer as well.
What about the allergy in some questions concerning?
Yeah, so that's kind of what I mentioned. If you have immediate allergy or anaphylaxis to one of the components, specifically they're mentioning polyethylene glycol as one of the components, which, I think many of us probably are familiar with that. It's like what's in Miralax, one of the laxatives that we use commonly. If you have severe allergy to that, that should be a contraindication. Now, people who have allergies to medications and other vaccines, generally speaking, we just watch them for 30 minutes after we give the vaccine. We don't really withhold the vaccine from them. So if you don't have any allergies, you have seasonal allergies and all of that regular type of allergies, that's not a reason to hesitate at all. But if you do have severe allergies to medications or other vaccines in the past, then you'll just be observed a little longer for 30 minutes instead of 15 minutes.
What about the bronchial asthma?
You have any questions from the Facebook? Any questions from the Facebook? If not, we'll take from here Q&A.
Yes, in the Facebook, actually, there are few questions, and they are thanking you for the impressive presentation and talk about this in real time. So they are asking about the side effect, one question about the side effect of the vaccinations.
The main side effect is you won't die of COVID.
Yep.
And that's absolutely true. And I think, you know, in terms of side effects from COVID vaccine, they really don't differ much from other vaccines. You get a little bit of a sore arm, you might get a little bit of fever, headache, body aches, maybe some nausea, some et cetera, et cetera. I did notice personally that side effects after the second dose were a little more severe than the first dose. And that's also been reported in clinical trials, that the side effects after second dose of mRNA vaccine, both Pfizer and Moderna, were a little more severe. But then, like to Prof. Richard's point, you know, we're talking about 105 million people getting COVID and 2.3 million people dying from COVID, while we're talking about 145 or 124 million people getting the vaccine and not a single death linked to the vaccine yet, and very minimal side effects and a couple of people fainting on TV, etc. So there is really not even a comparison here to make between the vaccine itself versus getting COVID. And if we want to get to herd immunity, there are just two pathways to get there. You either get vaccine or get COVID, and you know, you want to take your risk. I would definitely favor the vaccine route.
I have
It's
my second
sore
dose
arm for a day versus asphyxiation slowly over several weeks and a terrible death.
I got the mRNA vaccine. I was lucky. I didn't get any reaction. No single, not locally, not fever, not headache, not body ache, nothing.
And that's really good and lucky. For people who do get the side effects, I tell them it's actually a good sign. You know, it's not a bad sign that you got some side effects. So if anything, that means maybe you reacted a little more to the vaccine than somebody else. But that's all obviously theoretical at this point. But side effects are not necessarily a bad thing, even if you got them.
There is a question about if somebody is tested positive for COVID antibodies, does he still need to have a vaccine, and for how long these antibodies will stay?
Since we don't know if antibodies are strongly predictive of effective protection from COVID, and so we don't know how long they last. Some people, they last longer than others. It's likely to mean that there is some immune reaction, but not solid. And so the only way to be sure is the vaccine.
Here, the protocol, if someone is positive, we look for neutralizing antibody, and there is a cutoff. If it is below that cutoff, they have to get the vaccine. If not, if it's higher, then they wait until later on. Not decided when, but still also for how long this will be positive or neutralizing antibody will be there. This will take will be more clear with time. The second thing is the cellular immunity. People tend to forget about the cellular immunity and the memory, immunological memory, because this is also very important. It's not only antibodies. Antibodies, yes, will block the S protein, so the virus will not enter. But if the virus enter, you need cytotoxicity, you need cellular immunity, you need memory, so the immune system will recall the virus when it sees it again, even there is no antibody. But all these things will be clarified with time.
And maybe, Prof. Bani, if you allow me, there's a few questions in the chat also about the same, if I test positive or if a patient tests positive or has COVID. So this, what Professor Richard and Professor Mai said also applies. So if someone had COVID or if your patient had COVID, they're also eligible to get the vaccine. So just to clarify that.
Yes.
And I also agree, and if you don't mind, I just wanted to clarify the beauty of this panel is that we do have a global representation. And like, if you look at certain guidelines, they differ from one place to another. Even in the US, our guidelines have been dynamic, like it's guidance at this point, not guidelines, but they have been quite dynamic depending on the need and the resources. So while we do say, if you got COVID, you should get the vaccine, and you can get the vaccine as soon as you get out of isolation, mostly to protect healthcare workers from exposing them to you when you have COVID. But now we're actually saying, because of resources and because there is no cases of reinfection within the 3 months after you get COVID, we say it's okay to wait 3 months. You know, we don't really say you can't get it within the first 3 months, but we say it's okay to wait 3 months because it's highly unlikely you would get reinfection in the first 3 months. So depending on resources, that might be something to follow in Sudan as well, because you don't really need it in those first 3 months, but you want to get it as soon as possible, especially with high risk, right at the end of that 3 months, so you can build immunity.
And there's maybe two things. Again, there's a question in the comments about hypertensive and diabetic patients, and in most guidelines, if I'm not mistaken, and the panelists can chime in, they're actually considered priority populations. So those with comorbidities are priority populations and should be are part of the first group prioritized and to be vaccinated before the rest of the group. I wonder, just to put a question out there, how long will it be? Because one of the guidelines I've registered for my vaccine, I still haven't got it, but there was a little note, please bring your vaccination card with you. And I'm just thinking, how long will it be before we start seeing all those access issues? You cannot travel if you're not vaccinated. You cannot go back to work physically if you're not vaccinated. You cannot go here and there without being vaccinated. So as a public health specialist, these are the things that I worry about. So I would encourage to go with, vaccinate yourself, advocate those around you to vaccinate, as long as you're not part of those who are not supposed to get the vaccination for now, according to your local guidance. Promote to yourself and to others to get the vaccination and increase the.
Thank you. There's 3 questions concerning Sudan to address the challenge in Sudan. One of them is about comorbidities, the availability of data. And the other concern is about the accessibility, whether to target individuals or families. And the third question is about how to prevent corruption and black market practices in Sudan. It's open to Dr. Dalia and the panel.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Okay, already I have listed on the challenge that the comorbidity registration is a big gap for us in Sudan. We have data from National Health Insurance, but it's not adequate. But the good thing that the 20% that followed the SAGE recommendation on prioritization of the population, the SAGE is a strategic advisory group of experts on immunization. They recommend that the prioritization sequence, it starts with the healthcare workers and elderly, especially with comorbidity, and then the essential workers such as teachers and frontliner, the street level bureaucrats, the bankers, the police officers, and so on. So for the comorbidity, it's already include. When we look on the 20% target, it's equivalent to 8.6 million. Out of them is 6 million more than 45 years of age. I think those people with most of the people with comorbidity, they will rely on those prioritized population. However, still, if we would like to rely on the registers, the registry is deficient for comorbidity registration. زي ما قلت يمكن 8.6 مليون منهم 6 مليون هم people أكثر من 45 years of age. وإحنا أصلاً young population below 16 years of age is not recommended to be vaccinated at this time unless they have other issue for prioritization. عشان كده ما في يعني هي challenge لكن ما ذات much big struggle for the vaccination program. We'll start, as I've said, with 3% اللي هم mainly healthcare workers, and احنا حسبناها بالدوز حيفضل very limited. حتى even the healthcare workers we will prioritize them. حيفضل جزء بسيط will prioritize for the essential workers اللي هم ال school teachers وال university teachers وال الستريت ليفل بروكراتس اللي هم البانكرز والناس اللي بيلاقوا الجمهور كتير يعني. دي الإيشو الثاني أنا ما فهمت الكويشن كويس، لكن will not vaccinate يعني ما حيكون door to door ولا house to house campaign. إذا أنا فهمت الكويشن يعني هو حيكون the service delivery strategy will be fixed post at health facilities and will not burden the routine immunization program حقنا لأنه under 5 they are needing the service. لكن will come up with the vaccination posts specifically for COVID-19 vaccination. Already many health facilities identified to embark the vaccination post within it يعني, especially for Khartoum والجزيرة state.
في question around how we are going to control the maldistribution within the health facilities.
ما قادرة أفهم الكويشن. نحن في health facility will vaccinate all the people in the health facility, whether doctors, gatekeepers, العمال اللي هم they clean the floors الفراشين وكده. maldistribution يعني القصد من national. إذا في another لي ولا ندى لو فهمتوا الكويشن ما قادرة.
So if I can, because I raised this, Dr. Dalia, in my presentation, اللي هو الخوف من إنه الفاكسين يتسرب، إنه الخوف إنه الفاكسين ما يكون بتديه وزارة الصحة بالطرق والوسائل والسيرفيس ديليفري distribution mechanisms already متفق عليها، إنه يطلع للبلاك ماركت، يطلع للسوق الأسود. واللي هي the challenge we had in Sudan وما in Sudan بس. We have this challenge in many of the health systems اللي هو السكيورتي بتاعت البرودكتس بتاعتها is weak لأن it's weak health systems and they're stretched. ده هو السؤال، وأنا أعتقد أنا قبلك I mentioned إنه we have to address it في الأول، نعترف إنه هو an issue ونعترف إنه هو challenge while we are في national program في السودان while we are designing كل الحاجات دي. إحنا we design الديستريبيوشن، الكولد تشين، اللوجيستكس، منو يستلم الفاكسين، منو يمضى، منو يختم، منو يدي الدوزز، الاكاونتابيلتيز، انه الحاجات كلها في النهايه البالانس يكون رايت. لانه we're seeing challenges حسي احنا في افريقيا كلها وفي السودان برضو. There's a lot of anecdotal data around how testing feel that there's a lot of black market في التستنج، وممكن تشتري certificate بتاع being negative برا السيرتيفايد لابوراتوريز، اللابس اللي هو يعني معترف بها من المينستريز اوف هيلث. فهي دي مشكله حلها ما بسيط، وحلها ما بس للكوفيد فاكسين، حلها للاذر برودكتس as well. Over.
هو طبعا يعني احنا already انا يمكن listed في الchallenges انه الgovernance issues وحتى even الايشوز زي دي will jeopardize a very strong national immunization program اللي currently شغال ل 14 vaccine للأندر 5 وإيفن اليلو فيفر والأورال كوفيد كوليرا فاكسين لما يحصل outbreak. الايشو ده احنا we addressing this لكن we rely on ال high steering committee. مثلا فور اكزامبل لانه كنا خايفين يجي داخل بالمطار، يعني الناس شايلوه في الشنطه يعني الفاكسين. خاطبنا وزاره الداخليه واداره الجمارك على انه يقووا اليات الضبط في المعابر، في الحدود، في المطار، في كده. لكن still we need a lot of work. ممكن جزء من الناشونال ديبلويمنت بلان عايزين to reinforce ولا to revive الريجوليتوري اوثوريتي اللي بتكون زمان كان في المطار في وحده بتاعت المجلس بتاع الصيدله والسموم بتكون قاعده وبتعمل ضبط واحضار وبتفتش وكده. للاسف السنتين او الثلاث سنين اللي فاتت دي لايشوز لاسباب كثيره ضعفت الاليه دي. فاحنا واحده من الاكتيفيتيز اللي حتكون وضعناه في الخطه وايفن كوستد انه how to bring that يعني الاليات دي ترجع زي زمان. يعني برضو يمكن لانه بنسمح كثير السفارات بدات تطعم، الشركات بدات تطعم، فخاطبنا وزاره الخارجيه اللي هو الناس المعنيين بالبحثات الدبلوماسيه والسفارات وحتى ايفن وزاره الداخليه للشركات. لكن على اللو سكيل ديفينتلي الحاجه دي حتحصل، اصلا ما فيها نقاش. يمكن حاجه ما شفناها في الفاكسينز الثانيه لانه يمكن الكوفيد ماركت اكثر من حاجات، فيه حاجات كثيره كده. لكن متوقعين شديد انها تحصل، بالذات يعني بالذات الفاكسينز اللي في درجه حراره 2 to 8. يعني ما بتوقع مثلا فايزر كان يجي مهرب، لكن بالذات الفاكسينز الاسترازينيكا مثلا او السينوفارم او كده يعني متوقعين انه يدخلوا بالمطار بالحدود بوتبر الحاجه. المشكله بعد ذلك بيبقى انه هل احنا الهيلث كير وركرز بتاعنا او الفاكسينيترز والناس اللي شغالين في الاي بي اي بروجرام انهم هم ذاتهم يبقوا يعني هم يهربوا او هم يطلعوا للبلاك ماركت. ده ايشو صراحه ما شفناه قبل كده في الاي بي اي لكل الفاكسينز اللي عندنا. اي دوز اي فيال احنا بالباتش نمبر بتاعها بتكون معروفه ومحسوبه وكده. وسبيسيفيكلي حسي احنا كان عندنا الناشونال بوليو كامبين باللقاح الفموي الاحادي دي، فقدرنا نجمع كل الفيروس الامتي وكده من السودان كله. يعني ما كان في اي ليكجز يعني. لكن مش متوقع اصلا، ما في 2 3. عشان كده احنا يعني بتمنى انه يكون الستيرنج كوميتي اللي هي على رئاسة مجلس الوزراء تكون يعني شغالة بنفس الريزم بتاع اللجنة الفنية. حقيقي ناس في السودان شغالين كل ال9 سب كوميتيز هم شغالين للخطة لإدخال اللقاح بمنتصف مارس إن شاء الله.
And just maybe to say one thing, دكتورة داليا، بروف باني and to everyone. برضو يعني عشان نساعد ناس الحكومة، برضو نساعد المينستري اوف هيلث، نساعد ناس الاي بي اي، الناس التعبانين، برضو individual community accountability is very important. If you see that, you report it. Don't take الدوزز إلا في الحدة المفروض عليها. ما تشتري من السوق الأسود. كل الحاجات دي are important. In the same way where we as individuals مهم نكلم ناس بيتنا كل 5 دقائق إنهم they have to get the vaccine and they have to get tested or يضربوا ل 999 ولا 121. نفس الحاجات دي مهمة إنه تستمر لما يجي الفاكسين. يعني الكوميونتي accountability مهمة برضه. في كل زول فينا إحنا عندنا individual قاعد في البلد أو برا البلد عندنا responsibility to support the national program. Over.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. We have last 2 questions. One of them about what are the benefits of taking, or is it beneficial to take a mix of vaccination, like to take one Chinese and one Pfizer? Or the other question is about how.
It's a great question that we can't answer. It may well be that mixing of vaccines is fine or even better, but we are not able to know this. So what we know is from clinical trials which use the proper levels of either 1 or 2 vaccinations of a single vaccine candidate. England has decided to go with the possibility that mixing or changing or using a single dose will provide a period of protection which is better. It may well be a good idea, and we have no way to know. We will know 6 months from now.
And just to complement Professor Richard, UK is the only country in the world that has that guidance, because all the other guidance is based on the clinical trial. So mix and match is only in the UK so far. Over.
Thank you. The last question is about what percentage of the world population to be vaccinated to stop or until to stop the COVID-19?
Well, the interesting part of the question is the term stop. Because herd immunity, which probably is somewhere between 50 to 80%, although as COVID evolves, may require higher than 80%, will greatly reduce transmission. But we don't, in the real world, have an impression that we will likely be able entirely to stop transmission.
Okay, thank you. I think we are about...
بروف بس في question من عائشة جحفر هي addressing to me mentioned that to cover 20% of population. What about the other 80%? Actually نحن available عندنا now 20% already في ال vaccine request form من جافي طلبنا 45 additional doses. still ما قادرين منو رح يدفع او الفاينانسنج بتاعها ما واضح، لكن احنا اوريدي كتب يعني رفعناها في الفاكسين ريكويست فورم. هوب انه يكون في شغالين في الريسورس موبيلايزيشن انه تدفع، لكن ستيل حاسه حاليا الاولويه بتاعتنا والبرايورتي بتاعتنا لل 20% الاون هاند يعني. وبرضه بنفكر بالببليك برايفت انجيجمنت موديل نلقى فاكسينز ببايلاترال ديلز تجينا، لانه زي ما قلت لك بين التايم فاكتور بتاعنا مشكله كبيره انه الناس كلها عايزه فاكسين ناو، لكن على حسب البرايورتايزيشن ما حيحصل الحاجه دي. الترانشز اللي حتجينا من ال 20% حتكون مواصله سمول ترانشز لحد نهايه شهر 8. الحاجه الثانيه سالت من الناشونال ريجوليتوري اوثوريتي اوف immunization is it functioning? Yes هي functioning. ما بتستقبل فاكسين ما WHO pre-qualified، لكن هي already في بلان اتوضعت لانها تعاين للفاكسينز اللي اخذت من stringent regulatory authority والemergency use listing بتاعت WHO. already الحاجات دي موجوده. خدت يعني شنو الريكويرمنتس من المانيفاكتشرر المفروض يدينا ككنتري، واللايبيليتي والاندمنيفيكيشن بتاعنا للمانيفاكتشرر حيكون شنو. دي just to cover الأسئلة.
أنا عندي لك سؤال يا داليا، سؤال political شوية.
اتفضلي بروف.
أنتوا قلتوا you will not give any vaccines that not approved by WHO. وأنا شايف نائب رئيس مجلس السيادة he went and he got the Chinese vaccine from United Arab Emirates and this is not approved by WHO. Will you give it or not?
والله يا بروف احنا طبعا الكلام ده برضو سمعناه في الاخبار زي باقي الناس، ويمكن دكتور اسامه وزير الصحه خاطب مخاطبه رسميه عن المجلس السيادي في الكلام ده. ما وصلنا حد الان اي كوميونيكيشن من المجلس السيادي او مجلس الوزراء ريجارد الايشو ده. في كلام بس انه يعني حايم كده، لكن ما في حاجه في يدنا. الحاجه اللي احنا بنقولها في ادفوكيت فور ات في اي حته انه احنا الكابابيلتيز بتاعت الريجوليتوري اوثوريتي بتاعتنا ما بتسمح انه يكون اللقاح ما بري كواليفاي، ما حتى ايفن ما ايمرجنسي يوز ليستنج، فبالتالي ما حنقدر نستقبل اي لقاح. برضو الحاجه المهمه يعني هو سينوفارم افتكر اندر ريفيو للامرجنسي يوز ليستنج. ما بيكون في مشكله اذا في يوم من الايام اخذ، يعني احنا ما عندنا، يعني دائما بقول لانه حصلت مش يعني في كم حته كده الناس بتقول انه احنا ليه ما دايرين الصيني. ابدا احنا ما عندنا مشكله مع الصين ولا عندنا مشكله مع الروس ولا عندنا مشكله مع اي لقاح. مشكلتنا الاساسيه انه احنا الكابابيلتيز بتاعتنا ما بتقدر تشتغل على انها تعرف كل الفاكسين سيفتي ميجرز يعني. وبالتالي عشان كده معتمدين على ال WHO emergency use listing. once انه الفاكسين اخذ emergency use licensing ولا even من stringent regulatory authorities زي ال FDA ولا الأوروبي البورد بتاع الميديسينز فاكسينز الأوروبي، ما عندنا مانع بعد ذاك يكون يدخل بالريكويرمنت اللي بيطلبها المجلس بتاع الصيدلة والسموم.
Thank you.
Comment, Bani. Just a quick comment to Dr. Dali. I really applaud you guys for working in such dire circumstances, extremely hard condition, economically, politically, socially, from all of these angles, and holding such high standards. I've been following what you guys have been doing from distance, but it's really impressive that you were able to hold to these high standards in all levels, from the concept development all the way to the distribution plan with very limited resources. I honestly I can't really tell how you guys do it, but it's very impressive.
شكرا يا ندى. وانا برضو بشكرك يا ندى على انك انت برضو بتدعمينا في بالذات التراك بتاع الكوميونتي انجيجمنت والكوميونتي الديماند والاكسبتنس بتاع الكوميونتي. شكرا لك كثير. انا عارفه انك متواصله مع الشباب في السب كوميتي دي وشغالين على الحاجه دي. برضو بشكر كل الدياسبورا وكل زملائنا الاطباء وغير الاطباء اللي هم قدموا يعني المساعده بتاعتهم الفنيه والماديه، لانه كيف نقدر نكتب حتى ايفن الدرافت بتاع الدوكيمنت اللي احنا البلان اللي احنا رفعناها وجيزت من جافي especially التراك بتاع الريجستريشن وهاو تو ديفلوب الكترونيك تراكنج سيستم. وصراحه الناس يعني شغاله، واحنا فيري اوبن لكل الناس اللي عايزين يدعموا السودان في انه تجت الفاكسينيشن. وبرضو عايز الناس تتعاون. FMOH عندنا very soundsful بلان optimistic. عايزين كل الناس to work together إنه الحاجة دي تتحقق ونقدر نحمي أهلنا. إحنا فقدنا ناس عزيزين شديد. أنا ماما الله يرحمها توفت بكوفيد قبل شهرين، فأتمنى إنه الناس بجد كلها تخد يدها في بعض. especially أنا قاعدة أقول في بيحصل كده إزعاج من البوليتيشنز وكده، وفي استعجال وفي كده. برضو الناس تحاول تفهم السيتويشن overall. يعني هو في uncertainty في العالم كلها، فالناس برضو تكون واعية لأنه السودان ما بدأ فاكسينيشن، لكن حيبدأ إن شاء الله في أول أسبوع في شهر 3. وزي ما قلت 3% من اللقاح أسترازينيكا. عندنا 3,396,000 جرعة حتصلنا في أول مارس. prioritize للهيلث كير وركرز. ولما أقول هيلث كير وركرز ما بقصد أطباء، بقصد كل الناس الشغالين في الحقل الصحي، من الأطباء والممرضين والفراشين والفي الباب. أي زول عنده ريسك للمرض ده هو حيكون prioritize. وبرضو الالدرلي with comorbidity. وبعد ذاك في prioritization sequence واضح جدا موجود إن شاء الله.
Thank you, Dr. Dalia, for reassurance of the Sudanese community, and also for support for this program, and also Sudanese diaspora for helping and supporting the Ministry of Health. I think now we are at the end of our webinar. We are almost 15 minutes over.